For my birthday, my sister presented me with a cake that read, "Congrats on being average." My wife recorded everyone laughing while I pretended to smile. I blew out the candles, took photos, and cleaned up the mess alone. Nobody noticed I remained silent. A week later, she reached out at 2 a.m., screaming, "You emptied everything." I, 34M, stared at the cake my sister had placed in front of me, the fluorescent kitchen lighting making the white frosting look almost sickly. The red letters spelled out, "Congrats on being average," in what I assumed was supposed to be cheerful script. My wife held up her phone, recording as everyone burst into laughter around our dining table. My parents, my sister, her husband, my wife's brother, and a few close friends had all gathered for what I thought was going to be a normal birthday celebration. Instead, I found myself the center of a joke I hadn't signed up for. My sister announced that since I'd been complaining about feeling stuck in my career lately, she thought this would be funny. Everyone seemed to think it was hilarious. I forced my mouth into what I hoped looked like a good-natured grin and made some comment about how creative she was. My wife kept that camera rolling, capturing every second of my supposed enjoyment. When she asked me to say something for the video, I managed to joke about embracing mediocrity. More laughter, more recording. The candles were those trick ones that kept relighting themselves. I blew them out 3 times before they finally stayed dark, which only added to the entertainment value for everyone else. My wife got multiple angles of my increasingly frustrated attempts, commenting about how even the candles thought the joke was too good to end. After the cake cutting and more photos, people started filtering into the living room. I found myself alone in the kitchen, loading plates into the dishwasher and wiping down surfaces. Nobody offered to help. My sister was busy showing everyone the photos she'd taken on her phone. My wife was already posting the video to social media. I scraped frosting off plates and listened to the continued laughter from the next room. Someone mentioned how I was such a good sport about everything. Another person said they wished they could take jokes as well as I did. The irony wasn't lost on me that even their compliments felt like backhanded observations about my supposed passivity. The cleanup took 45 minutes. By the time I finished, half the guests had already left. My sister gave me a hug goodbye and told me she hoped I enjoyed my special day. Her husband mentioned that the cake would probably end up being my most memorable birthday ever. My wife was still showing people the video on her phone. I spent the rest of the evening in my home office, supposedly catching up on work emails. Really, I was sitting in the dark thinking about that cake and everything it represented. The message felt less like a harmless joke and more like a summary of how everyone in my life seemed to view me. Average. Predictable. Someone who would smile and take it no matter what. My wife came in around midnight to ask if I was okay. I told her I was fine, just tired. She mentioned how viral the video was already getting on her social media, with friends commenting about what a fun family I had. She seemed genuinely excited about the engagement it was generating. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Not just about the party, but about my entire situation. I started paying attention to patterns I'd previously ignored. How decisions about our social calendar were made without consulting me. How my opinions seemed to carry less weight in conversations. How I'd somehow become the reliable one who handled logistics while everyone else had fun. My job in accounting had always been stable but unremarkable, exactly like my sister's cake suggested. My wife worked in marketing and constantly talked about her exciting projects and difficult clients. At family gatherings, people asked her about work with genuine interest. They asked me if I was still doing taxes. The video kept getting shared. Friends from college commented on it. Coworkers saw it. My boss even mentioned it during a meeting, joking about departmental performance reviews. Each view felt like another person confirming that yes, this assessment of my life seemed accurate to them too. I started making small changes. Nothing dramatic initially, just paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. Like how my wife's spending habits had gradually increased over our 5 years of marriage. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, weekend trips with friends that somehow always came out of our joint account. When I'd mentioned budgeting in the past, she dismissed it as me being unnecessarily worried about money. I began documenting things more carefully. Our financial situation, household responsibilities, social commitments. What I found wasn't shocking, exactly, but it painted a clear picture of how one-sided many aspects of our marriage had become. I was the one ensuring bills got paid, groceries got bought, and maintenance issues got handled. She was the one making plans that spent our money and posting about our supposedly perfect relationship online. My sister had always been the golden child in our family. Outgoing, spontaneous, the one who got attention for being entertaining. I was the responsible one, the one who helped our parents with technical problems and remembered everyone's birthdays. Somehow this had translated into being seen as boring, reliable, average. But average people don't typically have the kind of detailed financial records I'd been maintaining. Average people don't usually notice patterns in behavior the way I'd started to. Average people definitely don't have the kind of patience required to document everything methodically while appearing completely normal on the surface. 3 days after my birthday, I opened a separate bank account. Nothing dramatic, just a simple savings account at a different bank. I started redirecting my direct deposit there instead of our joint checking. My wife wouldn't notice immediately since she rarely looked at our actual banking details, preferring to just use her card without monitoring balances. I also began photographing things. Important documents, expensive purchases, social media posts. Creating a comprehensive record of our life together, but from a perspective nobody else was considering. My background in accounting made organizing this information almost automatic. The most interesting discovery was how much money my wife had been spending on things she never mentioned. Subscription services, online shopping, frequent expensive lunches. Over the past year, she'd spent almost $15,000 on discretionary purchases without discussing any of it with me. Meanwhile, I'd been bringing lunch from home and driving a car I'd owned for 8 years. My sister had made similar comments about money management during my birthday party, mentioning how lucky my wife was to have someone so financially responsible. Everyone had laughed about how I probably had spreadsheets for everything. They weren't wrong, but they had no idea how detailed those spreadsheets actually were. By the end of the week, I'd moved most of our savings into accounts she didn't have access to. Technically, the money was mine anyway, earned from my supposedly average job that everyone found so unremarkable. I made sure to keep enough in our joint account to cover immediate bills, but everything else went elsewhere. I also started making some other preparations. Updated my will to remove her as beneficiary. Changed emergency contacts at work. Small administrative tasks that felt both necessary and somehow liberating. For someone supposedly average, I was certainly capable of planning ahead effectively. Update 1. My phone rang at 2:17 a.m. exactly 1 week after my birthday. My wife was screaming before I even finished saying hello. She'd finally checked our bank accounts and discovered that our savings were gone. She demanded to know where the money was and accused me of stealing from her. I told her calmly that the money was still ours, just distributed differently. She became increasingly hysterical, threatening to call the police and claiming I was having some kind of mental breakdown. I reminded her that legally, I had every right to move money I'd earned from one account to another. She switched tactics, suddenly becoming tearful and apologetic. She said she knew the birthday cake had hurt my feelings and that she should have defended me better. She promised things would change if I just put the money back. I listened quietly while she pleaded, occasionally making supportive sounds. After about 20 minutes of her alternating between rage and desperation, I told her I needed time to think about everything. She begged me not to make any hasty decisions and promised we could work through whatever problems I was having. I agreed that we should definitely talk more, but not at 2 a.m. when we were both emotional. The next morning, she was unnaturally sweet. She made breakfast, which she hadn't done in probably 2 years. She asked about my day at work, listened attentively to my answers, and suggested we plan a special dinner for the weekend. All behaviors that had become rare in our relationship. I played along, acting grateful for her renewed attention while internally noting how quickly her behavior could change when motivated. She kept bringing up the money indirectly, mentioning bills that would need to be paid soon and expressing worry about our financial security. I reassured her that all our obligations would be met. That evening, she suggested we sit down and go through our finances together. She wanted to understand our budget better and maybe find ways to optimize our spending. I agreed this was a great idea and pulled out the detailed records I'd been maintaining. Her face changed when she saw how comprehensive my documentation was. I showed her exactly where every dollar had gone over the past 18 months. The subscription services she'd forgotten about. The expensive purchases she'd made without discussion. The gradual increase in her personal spending while mine had remained constant. She became very quiet as we went through everything. When I asked if she wanted to discuss any of these expenses, she claimed she hadn't realized how much she'd been spending. She said she'd been stressed lately and sometimes shopped without thinking about it carefully. She promised to be more mindful going forward. I told her I appreciated her acknowledgement and that I was glad we were finally communicating openly about money. Then I mentioned that I'd also been thinking about other aspects of our relationship that might benefit from better communication. Her expression became guarded. Update 2. Over the next few days, my wife made dramatic changes to her behavior. She started doing housework without being asked. She cooked dinner 3 nights in a row. She even suggested we spend a quiet evening together instead of going out with friends. It was like living with a completely different person. She also began questioning me about the money more directly. She wanted to know which bank I'd moved it to, when I planned to move it back, and whether I was seriously considering leaving her. I remained vague, telling her I was still processing everything and needed more time to make decisions. Meanwhile, I'd been having interesting conversations with a divorce attorney. Purely consultative, I explained, just to understand my options. The lawyer was impressed by the financial documentation I'd assembled and suggested that my wife's spending patterns could be relevant in asset division discussions. I also spoke with my company's HR department about changing my beneficiary information on my retirement accounts and life insurance policy. The representative mentioned that these kinds of updates often happened when people were going through major life changes. I agreed that I was definitely experiencing some transitions. My sister called to check on me, having heard from our parents that my wife seemed worried about something. I told her everything was fine, just some routine financial planning that had my wife concerned. My sister mentioned that marriage could be complicated and that she hoped we worked through whatever issues we were having. I thanked her for her concern and mentioned how much I'd appreciated her creative birthday cake. She laughed and said she was glad I'd been such a good sport about it. I told her it had certainly been memorable and had given me a lot to think about afterward. By Thursday, my wife was becoming more desperate. She'd looked up divorce laws online and discovered that my earning history and our spending patterns could significantly impact asset division. She started talking about couples therapy and suggested we take a vacation together to reconnect. I told her these were interesting ideas worth exploring. When she asked if that meant I was willing to work on our marriage, I said I was certainly willing to work on something. She seemed relieved by this response, though I noticed she was still checking our bank accounts multiple times per day. That weekend, she suggested we have dinner with my parents. She thought it might be good for us to spend time with family while we worked through our communication issues. I agreed this sounded like a nice idea and offered to make reservations somewhere. At dinner, my wife was unusually attentive to my parents, asking detailed questions about their lives and expressing interest in topics she'd never cared about before. She mentioned how much she valued our family relationships and how grateful she was to be part of such a close group. My mother later commented to me privately that my wife seemed different lately, more engaged and considerate. I told her that people sometimes went through phases where they reevaluated their priorities. My mother said she hoped this meant good things for our marriage. Update 3. 2 weeks after the money disappeared, my wife made an interesting discovery. She found business cards for the divorce attorney in my desk drawer, along with printouts of our financial records and notes about asset division. She confronted me immediately, waving the papers and demanding an explanation. I told her honestly that I'd been exploring all my options while trying to understand our relationship better. She accused me of planning to divorce her behind her back and lying about wanting to work on things together. I reminded her that she'd been spending money behind my back for months without discussing it with me. She broke down crying, admitting that she'd taken our marriage for granted and hadn't realized how unhappy I'd become. She begged me to give her a real chance to change things, promising that she would do whatever it took to save our relationship. I listened to her promises while observing how differently she communicated when she was genuinely scared versus when she was just going through the motions. This version of my wife was far more authentic than the artificially sweet person she'd been pretending to be for the past 2 weeks. We had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. She acknowledged that she'd been selfish with money and had stopped appreciating what I brought to our relationship. She admitted that the birthday cake had been cruel and that she should have defended me instead of recording it for entertainment. I told her I appreciated her honesty and that I'd needed to see whether she was capable of recognizing these problems. The money situation had been a test to understand how she would react when consequences became real rather than hypothetical. She asked if this meant I was willing to try rebuilding our marriage. I told her it meant I was willing to see if the person she was being now could become permanent rather than just a response to crisis. She promised it would be, though we both knew promises were easier to make than keep. Over the following month, we began what felt like dating again. She made genuine efforts to understand my interests and include me in decisions that affected both of us. She started tracking her own spending and asking before making large purchases. Most importantly, she stopped treating me like a reliable background figure in her life. The changes felt real, though I kept the separate bank accounts active and maintained my documentation habits. Trust, I'd learned, was something that needed to be rebuilt gradually through consistent actions rather than desperate promises during crisis moments. My sister eventually asked if everything was okay between my wife and me, noting that she seemed different during recent family gatherings. I told her that sometimes people needed wake-up calls to realize what they'd been taking for granted. My sister said she hoped things worked out for us. 6 months later, my wife threw me a surprise birthday party. The cake simply said "Happy Birthday" in blue frosting. No jokes, no cameras, no performance for social media. Just a quiet celebration with people who actually seemed glad to be there with me. When I blew out the candles this time, I made a wish about maintaining the kind of relationship where neither person had to pretend to be someone else. My wife helped clean up afterward without being asked. Nobody called me average, and I didn't have to smile while pretending to enjoy being diminished. The money is still in separate accounts, though we now make financial decisions together. Some lessons, once learned, create permanent changes in how you approach protecting yourself. My supposedly average life had taught me that the most important skill isn't avoiding problems, but knowing how to respond effectively when they finally demand attention.